Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the Audit Committee. As we have quorum present, I call this meeting to order. Are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none, I will now take a motion to confirm the minutes from February 7th, 2018. Councillor Hart. All those in favor? And that is carried. We'll now go through the items. AU 12.1, Toronto Court Services, collection of provincial offence default fines. There's a speaker registered, and I understand we have a presentation on that, so I can hold that in my name. Madam Clerk. AU 12.2, Children's Services Division, opportunities to achieve greater value for childcare from public funds. I understand that we have speakers registered and that we have a presentation, so I'll hold that in my name. AU 12.3, review of the Toronto Transit Commission procurement policies and practices, a case study to improve future Wheel-Trans accessible taxi services procurement. Would a member of the committee wish to move that? Councillor Carmichael-Greb, all those in favor? That is carried. AU 12.4, Toronto Transit Commission response to the Auditor General Report, procurement policies and practices. We have a speaker registered for that. I will therefore hold that, and I will ask the committee, with your indulgence, perhaps it may be efficient to order that to the start of today's queue so that the TTC staff may be able to deal with the matter and be released from the room. I also understand that there's a presentation available. It's been included in the package, and I wanted to know if any of the members of the committee desired a presentation or not. If not, we can simply have the staff answer questions. I see consent on that, so we won't go with the presentation. AU 12.5, Toronto Transit Commission, PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP 2016 Management Letter Follow-Up Report. There are no speakers on that, so I'll take a motion from the committee to approve. Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? And that is carried. In AU 12.6, Business Improvement Areas 2017 Audited Financial Statements, Report Number 1. I'll take a motion for that. Councillor Matlow. All of those in favor? And that is carried. All right, so I will propose that we will go to AU 12.4. The Toronto Transit Commission response to the Auditor General Report, procurement policies and practices, and as I mentioned, we have a speaker registered. And if I can just get a confirmation here. Mr. Panser. Welcome to the Audit Committee, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to know the price of the Scarborough subway station. I hope that has some relationship to procurement practices. The mayor has said he will not allow that price to be known until after the October election. A reporter for the Toronto Star, Jennifer Pagliaro, called City Hall to try and find out the price of the Scarborough subway station, and she was told she will have to pay $32,000 to find out that price. I thought City Hall was working for the people, not the other way around. I would like to know, and I think the people of Toronto have a right to know, what is the new price for the Scarborough subway station? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Saying none, are there any questions of staff from the committee?
Sure.
Councillor Matlow?
Does anyone know what the price of the one-stop subway is?
Councillor Matlow, I'm not sure that the staff have that.
He made his point.
Thank you.
I got that. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, is there anyone wishing to speak on the item? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the recommendations? Councillor Carmichael-Greb, all of those in favor? Thank you. Okay, AU 12.1. I believe we're down to 2 items, number 1 and number 2. Toronto Court Services, collection of provincial offence default fines. We do have a speaker registered. Derek Moran.
Actually, I wanted to watch this presentation.
So our procedure is that the speakers will speak first. The only other suggestion I would have, if there's a motion from the committee to vary the order. I don't see that.
It might impact what I have to say after listening.
Understood, but I must welcome you at this point in time to the microphone.
They do this at the police board.
Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, so I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied. In doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. You know, I just want to say to the Auditor General, just what a wonderful idea this is, what she's trying to do, and help people out by properly being able to discharge these offenses lawfully by going to the CRA and giving them an opportunity to set off these offenses that people are, the mayor thinks that should be paid to the city. And I just wanted to explain how that would work. Last month at the police board, Councillor Hart here is a new member of the police board. He heard me speak a lot about security of the person in Section 7 of the Constitution and surety. And I just wanted to explain how that would work when the CRA, with the Auditor General's help, allows people to set off these debts. So this is pretty small printing, but at the beginning there, that's the Federal Interpretation Act definition section. Section 35.1, in every enactment, security means sufficient security, and sureties means sufficient sureties. And when those words are used, one person is sufficient, therefore, unless otherwise expressly required, and the French translation is caution ou cautionnement. And second here are the only 2 cases on Canley, the whole site, across the whole country, which explains what surety is by the courts. This is Schmidt Plaintiff Appellant versus Gavriloff et al. Defendants Respondents 1923, Canley, Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. A surety is one who contracts with a creditor that he will be answerable for the debt, default, or miscarriage of another who is the principal debtor and primarily liable. So, me being me, I love to ask questions. I wrote to the Registrar General. This is the letter at the email at the bottom. The Registrar General, and asked over and over and over again, and eventually I got a response from the Deputy Registrar General for the province of Ontario. Now she gives me like 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. My question was, are the signatures on the bottom of the birth certificate we get in any way significance in relation to the definitions in the Securities Transfer Act for endorsement, issuer, and guarantee? Her response was, I am unable to comment on your questions regarding the definitions of endorsement, issuer, and guarantee in the Security Transfers Act 2006. She got that wrong. It's the Securities Transfer Act. I regret I am unable to assist you further regarding this matter. Now remember, you all here at the City of Toronto just passed an open by default master plan fashioned on the Government of Ontario. And I just want to give you a great example of what open by default means to them. There's a difference between saying we're unable to answer your question and we're unwilling to answer your question. Because the reason why they don't want to answer that question can be found in the first line of the Constitution we have, Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Well, if that's what the supremacy is in their mind is, well, it's kind of like as above, so below. If Jesus died for our sins, and in this case, not having to act in commerce, then so does the crown. Because I just want to point out a while ago, I got an email from your Deputy Treasurer, Mike St. Amant here, and he's like, oh, I don't know, Derek, I don't know where you're getting all this trust law, accounting, and banking system. I don't know where you're getting all this from. So I ask questions of the government that, he's laughing right now, he's good sport. I ask questions of the government they don't want me to know the answers to. So in the future, if someone finds them stuck in one of these maritime jurisdiction courts, Callie Chapman knows what I'm talking about, what they should say is, if they're in these courts, what evidence has this court been given that I have any surety in this matter? If I have ever led this court to believe in any way that I am the party with surety in this matter, then that would be a mistake, and to please forgive me. Does this court take judicial notice of the fact that the Crown is the surety for the person I have?
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to us.
I'm going to...
Madam Auditor?
Thank you. Thank you, Audit Committee Chair. Before I commence, I'd like to thank my team, Ina Chan, Gawa Mark. I'd like to thank Calvin Coe and Saba Mohammed. And I'd also like to thank the Court Services team, City Manager's team, and all those who participated in the audit, including the Legal Services team. So my background for the presentation is to talk about a little bit about why the audit matters, look over the audit findings, and then discuss the conclusions that we found. By way of background, the city received the authority to collect fines back in 2002. There's approximately $200 million that was transferred over, and that's 1.4 million cases of unpaid fines that were transferred to the city for collection. And it includes the provincial offenses, including the Highway Traffic Act, Compulsory Assurance Act, city bylaws, and others. And I'd like to point out at this time, we received about $1.4 million cases, and the city has been working on those cases. They've collected, I think the balance right now is about 900,000 cases. So they have been working on the cases, but there are opportunities to tighten up and for improvement. So after the transfer, the post-transfer fines, it's $972 million in post-transfer fines, but $651 million are in green, they're collected. And there's about $316 million outstanding that are in default. So basically $1 in $3 is in default and is waiting to be collected. This is a quote from Alok Mukherjee, and he said, "Every unpaid fine undermines the justice system, it frustrates our law enforcement officer, it denies local governments of much-needed revenue in challenging economic times." So it's an important matter from the perspective of revenue, but it's also important for the fair administration of justice. Fines and offenses, fines for offenses, they help to encourage deterrence, for people to think twice. It's to ensure the fair administration of the law, but also to make sure the city is paid its funds that are owed. So the objective was to assess the framework for collecting the fines and to look at default fines as at June 30th, 2017. And this graph simply shows we received a balance, and I can say that the province had extreme difficulty collecting fines when they had this issue. So it's not new. It's something that is a very challenging area that we are focusing, the office city is focusing resources in. We have some opportunities to improve. Right now, the balance stands at $577 million, but I'm just going to unpack that. Not every dollar there is going to be collected, and I think it's important that we understand what's underneath that and what part of that is going to be the opportunity for collection. But this is the amount that's in the provincial system as the debt that's outstanding. So it is a real number, but we also have to look and say, well, what's realistic here? So I'm going to turn it over to Ina to have a look at the breakdown and to unpack these numbers.
This audit focused on the over 2 million cases with unpaid fines that have gone in default. So as of June 30th, 2017, there's 484 million in default fines, 421 million owing to the city, and 63 million to be collected by the city on behalf of the province. An additional 93 million is for collection agency costs, and it's currently considered to be in default, added into the provincial ICON system by court services in order to pay for potential collection agency costs. So in all, that's 577 million showing in the province's integrated courts offenses network system as being in default. And court services is responsible for collecting on these default accounts. I just wanted to clarify on that. The pre-transfer fines that are currently in the amount that's in default is $168 million owing to the city and province, plus collection agency costs, and then $316 million post-transfer amounts owing to the city and province, as well as collection agency costs.
And I'm just going to point out here, the 93 million goes back to the collection agency, so it doesn't come into the city coffers. So if it's collected, then it goes back to the agency for collection.
Inside of this amount, while the data from the ICON system indicates 577 million, this includes $155 million that court services has stopped actively pursuing. This includes old fines over 20 years, fines that relate to deceased persons or bankrupt or organizations, those where the debtor can't be identified from information available in ICON, including those with no fixed address, and the associated victim fine surcharges and collection agency costs. Still, regardless of the age of the fine, the convicted defendants are required to pay them as debts to the Crown are owed in perpetuity and can't be forgiven. In addition, management has advised that ICON shows amounts in default that may not actually be in default of around $18 million, and that's related to cases that are under appeal, where the fine would no longer be considered in default of about 4.3 million, plus victim fine surcharges and collection agency costs, as well as some cases that have been given additional time to pay and would no longer be considered in default as long as payments are being made, and that's about $9.6 million. So what we're finding is that the city should still be actively collecting on $332 million owing to the city and province, together with $71 million in collection agency costs, for a total of about over $400 million. What we did find was that the collection of defaulted POA fines is a complex area, and court services, together with other municipal court administrators, have successfully advocated for changes to legislation and improved collection tools, and they continue to advocate for these.
Yes, and I'm just going to add the legal services team has done a lot of work in this area to move forward the agenda here. And the timing on this slide, it helps to explain that some of these changes are fairly recent, so the tools and opportunities that we're bringing forth today is only going to help to make sure that the collections happen. So these are fairly recent changes, and our recommendations align with making sure that the collections happen, and they will happen.
So this slide provides an analysis of the age of the default fines. It's also included in the report on Figure 5. What we wanted to highlight is that taking prompt action is vital to collecting debts, and at June 30th, 2017, 74% of fines in default have been outstanding for more than 5 years. This slide highlights the number and amount of sentences with fines that go through the courts on a year-by-year basis. After the transfer of responsibility, the city saw growth in the sentences going through the courts, and then since 2012, there's been a downward trend. Voluntary payments on charges that aren't disputed where payment is made promptly and does not go through the courts is not included in this chart. Regardless, the proportion and percentage that is collected, or if equivalently goes into fault in any given year, has followed the same general trend, and that trend is shown in Figure 8 on page 32 of the report.
So now we get to our audit findings, and really there's 5 buckets, but we're only highlighting 4 today. It's really important to have a methodical and a consistent and timely approach. Being tight on the timing. Timing is everything in collections. The first 6 months, the first year, before people move, get married, life happens. So it's really important to get in contact with the debtor earlier. That we need to better leverage the tools we have, and then keep pushing on tools that the city needs and working with the province on that. Bucket C talks about having a strategic action plan and really making sure that information is front and center with City Council to show what's being done, what needs to be done, but also any help that the court team needs from a strategic level to move forward on the agenda as far as tools goes. And the 4th area is to centralize across the city the delinquent accounts receivable, which has been a recurring problem. So in applying in looking at this, for applying a methodical and consistent and timely approach, the collection strategies really have to be defined and outlined for each individual type of account. So if it's a high dollar, for example, maybe not alphabetical is a good way to go, maybe using the high dollar to apply a certificate of default. Also looking at the type of tool that's available for each kind of account. Also, how to contact the debtors. There's a lot of expertise in this area about how debtors respond, and so making sure that there's strategic collection in place. One of the areas that one of the tools that are used by the court services is private collection agencies, but the oversight there has to improve in order to not only get information back from the agency, but also to, where they're doing a great job, reward that with additional accounts. And the 3rd area that's in real need in court services is to modernize the use of data and technology and data analytics. So in respect to high dollar, we talked a little bit about this actually in looking at collection strategies in certain areas. One of the areas is high dollar. We talked about that. Corporations is another area. We have trouble with some of the collection tools, and court services and legal services have worked in this area, and they're going to continue to work in this area. Repeat offenders is an area where you might have a lot of accounts where the person has maybe no fixed address and has a lot of trespassing, or maybe, and we have cases where there's multiple insurance violations. If you can't collect on those accounts, the next question is, what do you do with those accounts, because they're still in the system? And so looking at those strategically, we provided some information within our report, but that's an area that has to be considered further. With collection agencies, prompt assignments is important. In 2008, internal audit recommended accounts going to collection agencies at least every 30 days. And we included a table on page 31 to show that it's sometimes 3-6 months. It's taking more time. In the collection world, 6 months and a year is a long time to have an account sitting. With respect to more frequent and faster rotations, we do see that there are times when it can take 8 months to rotate accounts once they're pulled back. So I have no doubt that Court Services is going to, with the focus on this, continue to make sure that that happens in a more timely way. Other improvements, we talked about setting performance targets for the performance of the agencies, making more assignments on performance. This third bucket, this requiring the enhanced information, the collection agencies collect a lot of information related to better address information when they find it, but that information doesn't get stored anywhere back into the city when they're finished. So we happen to recreate the wheel sometimes. And so having a better information system to capture that information will be important. So ICON is the system that is used for collections management right now. It's a provincial system where there's information in the system related to the court offenses, but the issue with ICON is that it's not a great collections management system. we need a better internal management collection activities, for a better system to manage the information. We need to leverage technology, and there has to be better data analytics in order to collect in a faster way. The information icon, we have to use the information icon, but you can have your own system where you get a flat file interface and upload, and then have the most current information in the system and better analytics on that information. Icon was identified as a 30-year-old system. It was identified by the Auditor General for Ontario as being deficient. I know that internal audit 10 years ago suggested that court services have another system. They did look at some systems, but it's now time to really take a look at getting the best system for not only court services, but other default accounts.
So as you mentioned, since 2002, the city court services and legal services, as well as their other municipal counterparts, court administrators, have advocated for a number of improvements to support collection of defaulted Provincial Offences Act fines. And as a result, over time, legislative changes have opened and may continue to open new or improved tools. Continuous improvement will promote a more consistent and coordinated approach to collecting and enforcing fines. So what we did find is some tools available to court services can be used more effectively, and the city's suite of collection tools can continue to evolve, and the city can continue to seek legislative amendments and partnerships to open up new channels for collection. So where fines remain in default, the city does have some tools at its disposal. The Auditor General mentioned that most defaulted fines will be placed with collection agencies. In addition, a variety of other tools are currently used by court services, including adding the fine to property tax rolls, filing certificates of default, providing direction to the Ministry of Transportation that driver's licenses be suspended or no licenses be issued until the defaulted fine is paid, and providing direction to the Ministry of Transportation that license plate renewal be denied until defaulted fines is paid. But we did find that there is opportunity for court services to continue to improve and to use these tools more effectively. To support their collection efforts, driver's licenses are suspended shortly after driving-related fines go into default. So approximately 77,000 debtors currently have their licenses suspended, and over 70% of those have been suspended for greater than 5 years. We did find that when licenses are suspended by the Ministry of Transportation, that it appears these suspensions are occurring in a timely manner. So when they get suspended, they are happening in a timely manner. Our challenge was that with the information we had, we couldn't confirm that all licenses that should have been suspended or were thought to be suspended were in fact suspended. We identified cases where driver's licenses should have been suspended but were not because of system issues or process deficiencies. Part of it is that the system doesn't necessarily identify which cases actually are eligible for suspension. So we've recommended that court services continue to review cases to, some cases to determine their eligibility and send them to the Ministry of Transportation. Single plate denial has been an enforcement tool for vehicle-based offenses for a number of years. So things like red light camera and parking tags, single plate denial has been in place for a number of years. And then in May 2017, the Making Ontario Roads Safer Act came into effect, which expanded multi-plate denial to include certain driving-based offenses with a conviction date on or after May 1st, 2010. And in that case, a debtor's license, once it's suspended, their plates also will be denied for renewal. Okay. Nearly 60% of defaulted fines related to Highway Traffic Act and Compulsory Automobile Insurance Act. Nearly 60% of the defaulted fines are related to those two acts, but 1/3 of those are actually not subject to license suspension or single plate denial. So for example, if plate denial doesn't apply if the debtor is not the registered owner of the vehicle in which the offense is committed, and it doesn't apply to companies cited for commercial motor vehicle-based offenses. So legislative changes can help to improve the ability to use plate denial without first having to suspend a driver's license, and may be helpful for enforcing payment by delinquent companies who have defaulted fines for commercial motor vehicle-related offenses. Plate denial does work when you can use it. We see that with the city, with parking tags, and we've seen it with some of these red light camera offenses, but we recommended the city discuss with the province to determine whether it can be used more, and in particular for companies. Since 2014, Court Services has issued 3,500 certificates of default. However, many of these were filed where debtors did not own property and did not have known employment information. And we found that Court Services should focus on better prioritizing the cases and accounts for which they're filing certificates of default and file them on a more timely basis. During our audit, we identified that they were given advice by legal to file certain certificates of default which were eventually filed but could have been filed in a timely manner, and they continue to file. At the end of April 2018, they filed a significant amount. Okay. Where the debtor is a sole owner of property, defaulted fines can be added to the property tax roll. From 2010 to 2017, the city added approximately $4.9 million in fines to the property tax roll, and there are high collection rates on this, plus interest can be charged once the fine has been added to the tax roll, which is also promotes prompt payment. It's especially important to quickly identify them and get them on the tax roll before property changes hands. So Court Services can improve its processes to identify more accounts that can be added to the property tax roll, and improved property matching can be helpful both for identifying accounts that can go on the property tax roll, as well as those cases that can be prioritized for certificates of default and writs. The audit identified approximately 8,380 unique debtors that may potentially own property. Approximately 30% are pre-transfer fines and 70% are post-transfer fines. Legal's assessing whether these can be added to the tax roll or have certificates of default and writ applied to them. While we recognize that they may not be able to get them all onto the tax roll or have writs, we also note that the matching criteria we used was very constrained, and slightly broader criteria with slight name variations because of potential spelling errors would probably yield additional results.
Yes, and I would say that, because some of the information is older and we're tracking down some information that we think might be missing, but we're going to track it down with the help of Court Services, even if it's half of that, it's a small amount. What's most important here is the process. By knowing this now, it can be more current and a tighter process, so the information doesn't go missing. We can put it, they can put it on the tax roll much quicker, and make sure that the search criteria are much broader. We had more hits, I think, than Court Services did.
So what would be helpful is legislative changes that would expand this use of the tool to jointly owned properties. Right now, it only applies to sole owner properties, and so the recommendation is to look to legislative changes or have the province consider legislative changes. There are a number of debtors that don't reside in Toronto but reside in Ontario, and so in 2014 a small-scale pilot project was initiated to have by Court Services to have fines added to the tax rolls of other jurisdictions. And the Treasurer has indicated that further expansion of the program will be pursued, and just recently a new agreement with the Region of York municipalities was signed the past month.
So the third area are opportunities to expand the current approach. We just talked about the tools that could probably be used a little better. Now we're looking at the opportunity to expand the approach. The first one is CRA. The leveraging of CRA, once you've done your, what I call your dunning, once you've contacted the debtor, if you still don't have payment, what happens is normally a flat file can be uploaded to CRA to do a set-off. Normally provinces do this. Because the province has downloaded, it's my view, I think we share the view of Legal Services, that the city probably has standing, we need to work on an MOU with the province to make this happen. I can say Legal Services and Court Services have been pushing in this area, but now that I've taken a look at it, I've spoken to CRA, I've spoken to the province, I think this is an area of improvement, and in court fines in another jurisdiction, once they're uploaded, they're seen about 50%, and even if we get 10% of the fines, if we can't collect them, it's more money without more effort. So once you've had the effort, it's almost a passive collection when there's an availability, for example, with a corporation of a refund or a GST or with an individual. So I'd like to congratulate the legal services and court services on the efforts they have made there, but there's another opportunity and you may need more leverage behind them. Business licenses. Sometimes we see people who come in who have a business license and they're renewing their license, and yet they have fines related to their license. And we're saying it's an opportunity simply to say, remind them that they have a fine, an offense, and ask them, to pay. At least you're face-to-face. They may have forgotten about it. Maintaining regular contact with the debtor. Single plate and multi-plate denial. Ina, my Assistant Auditor General, spoke to having the plate, like right now, if somebody is driving a company vehicle and they have an offense with that vehicle, what happens is if they don't pay, we don't get paid. And what we're suggesting, and what has been suggested before, is to deny the plate of that vehicle only for the company. So I have, for an example, a private school that has a driving offense with a bus of maybe about 3,500, or a driving offense, or it might be a vehicle offense of some sort. But it's not paid because the employee was in the seat. And so what we're saying is to bring it home, somebody needs to pay that. So legal services is going to continue to pursue that. The property tax roll in this area, legal services again has worked to try to have people who are in a joint ownership situation to have the fine attached to the tax roll. I support their efforts in this area, and we're going to need some support. I think the city's going to need some support to move that forward on the legislative agenda. And the last area is payment incentives. This is an area where I know in other provinces, excuse me, as soon as you have an offense, if you pay it within a very short period of time, 10, 15 days, there's a discount that happens. And what happens is it changes the mindset because you have top of mind. If you receive a speeding ticket, you want to get it paid because you want that discount. So we're just saying to explore that, that we think because it's in other provinces, it would require a legislative change, but it's an area of opportunity. So that's that finishes off the court services in particular, and now I'm moving to the citywide receivables in default. What we noticed was that court services was struggling with a system, and there was a struggle there to have a system, but we started to look at some of the previous recommendations we made about having accurate information, up-to-date information, and what we noticed was that there's all of these areas, the colors, are organizations that have receivables across the city, and there's receivables that are in default. And what we're suggesting is that the treasurer focus forward to see if he can have a central management of these default receivables. And so we feel that there's $1 billion in receivables, but not all is in default. There's opportunities for economies of scale. We have, for example, collection agencies being used by revenue services, collection agencies being used by court services, not necessarily the same collection agencies. Let's get together and we propose, working smarter, working together, and to make sure that these are managed centrally. And there's an opportunity to modernize and leverage technology. So our issues were, what we saw across the divisions over time was that there's a lack of really a consistent collection strategy, there's issues with data systems, and there's insufficient performance targets, and we thought City Council probably wants to have its finger on the pulse of what's in default, and centralizing it will assist with that. So this is an area of potential transformation, having a single point of authority, having more complete data, having a clear picture of what's in default and what needs to be brought to bear to help with those collections. Leveraging the experts and having a more effective collection tools and performance targets to make sure that they're closely monitored. And one suggested approach is to bring together specialists in the industry, be the IT specialist, collection specialist, share the city's experience, and then working together to leverage the best out there to help to solve the problem. So it's about sharing the problem, and we feel that those recommendations will help the city. So overall, it's important to maximize revenue collection, minimize the cost collected, and look for more effective reporting to City Council and effective management.
So overall, we have 31 recommendations.
I'm sorry, I missed that slide.
Overall, we have 31 recommendations, and that's really to help to deter offenses from happening and have effective administration of justice, to provide the public with assurance that the laws are working and we're upholding justice, and that we are collecting the dollars that are owed to the city.
Thank you very much for that presentation and for the report. I will ask members of council if they wish to ask any questions. If not, I will take that into committee. Councillor Matlow, you had indicated questions. Councillor Hart?
Questions just on the
And the report.
Thank you very much for the recommendations and your thorough report. And so the first question I have is, either to you or to city staff, or perhaps both, this is a lot of money. You reported that there has not been a methodical, in your words, methodical and consistent way to approach ensuring that we receive these fines. Why are we dealing with it now? Why hasn't this happened before? Why has it taken it so long? Why has it taken so long to put the mechanics together, the systems together, to do this efficiently, consistently, and methodically? Maybe to staff.
Yeah, so just, my name's Rodney Gill. I'm in legal services, and through the chair to the councillor, I don't know that you'd get full agreement from court services with respect to whether there has been a methodical approach. I'll give you one example. What we do twice annually is take the entire accounts receivable file and we compare that with the property tax roll. So it's an automated search, and we do that to try and find out anyone who is likely to own property, because for those people, we want to have a particularized collection strategy where we either add them to the tax roll or we pursue a certificate of default. And the reason you pursue the certificate of default is because if there's a joint owner of property, the tax rolling tool is not available, but the certificate of default converts it into a civil court judgment. So you can pursue that with a thing called a writ of seizure and sale, which is like a securing against the property interest. So that's I would say that's strategic. I would say that's methodical.
Do you disagree with the AG's findings? Or
not
that,
overall.
Or that comment specifically?
I would just say that comment specifically, and it might be just a disagreement in terms of the characterization. Could it be more effectively fine-tuned? I think that's a fair comment. But to say that there's no strategy or there isn't a method to it, I do disagree with that, because there is a particular strategy employed on particular types of fines. Even the $155 million that's not actively pursued, well, it's not actively pursued for several good reasons, right?
May I just ask, though, is it reasonable to say that the systems that you use that are used are successful if there's over $500 million in outstanding fines?
You know, that's the fantastic question, and I think that's what's really difficult to deal with. I'll try and give you some further context, because I thought that's what could have been developed further in the Auditor General's report. If you look at just kind of a few of the comments of the Auditor General this morning, I think she said that in the collections industry, 6 months and a year is a long time, right? Because she's making the point, if you delay on collection, you're going to have less of a collection result. Well, in the context of these fines, and particularly the large fines, the court is often being asked to give the defendant time to pay, and they can be given up to a year to pay. So what happens, and I'll just give you anecdotally what happens with a corporation, If they get a large fine, say the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, they don't have their building outfitted with the right fire protection measures, and they get a big fine, and if they get a year to pay, they now have a year to try and arrange their affairs to avoid collection. And this happens, okay? So they might sell their property in that year. They might wind up their company. All these types of things can happen. So it's a bit, there's a difficulty there, and that's just one example. I'll give you a couple others.
Given that I've got limited time, there is another question that I want to ask, but yes, I'm going to want to have, even if it's offline, I'm going to want to have some more information. So due to the announcement about the blitz that's going to occur this summer, could you provide me more information, speaking of a methodical approach, what will this blitz entail? Who is working on it? What resources do we have? How is this going to roll out? If I could get sort of a structured and, detailed explanation of what this blitz is going to be.
So Court Services is in the process of developing a plan to pursue that, but we already have a few things in place and are already working on it. For instance, there's you heard the Auditor General say there's over 8,000 people that they think are unique property owners. So we have that data file from the Auditor General, and my staff in legal, we're currently reviewing it to verify whether they are property owners. We've already identified about $250,000 that we're going to add to the tax roll. The file, it's hopefully being updated right now, and hopefully we can add it today. That's just kind of the first batch that we were able to look at. We're going to go through each one of these.
That doesn't sound like a blitz, though.
So
Last question.
I'm saying the strategy for the blitz is being developed, but we're in the midst of responding to the report. And, as you might imagine, that announcement was on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's Friday, and we're already working on it. So I can't give you the full plan today, Councillor, but I can tell you we already have about $250,000 that we're getting ready to add to the tax roll, and that's really just a first chunk. We expect there's going to be quite a few more. We have 1,000 further individuals that we think we're going to be able to go forward with. So
I would add to that, Councillor, I'm Susan Garrett-Sino with Court Services, that we're going to be leveraging the recent agreement with York Region, where we'll have additional opportunities to add to the York Region tax roll. So I think we'll find opportunities in that area as well. And we're looking at the data that the Auditor General was able to find through her audit and her team's audit, and we appreciate that. We recognize we do need to improve, and we've looked at some of those 600 debtors with over 50,000 K, and we're looking for those easy, quick wins and reviewing those files very carefully.
Thank you. Councillor Hart, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll direct this to the AG, but it might have to go to staff. I notice on slide 16 of your presentation, you talk about 4 key objectives. Objective number 1 was to be consistent and timely. I go back to the 2007 report of the internal auditor, where the internal auditor said exactly the same thing, and staff agreed to process to collection agencies within 30 days of expiry of the payment date. And staff agreed with that and said they would implement that effective August 2007. Your report on page 31 indicates, and I did the math on this, but indicates that 7.9% of fines are actually assigned within this period. But staff said back in August of 2007 that they accepted that and would process it. So my question, not so much of staff, but of internal audit, and I don't know if you would have this answer, is did internal audit ever go back, as they're supposed to do, and check on the implementation of their recommendations? And if they did, maybe we wouldn't be here today.
Chair, and it can happen in an audit where you have a recommendation. I don't know if they went back specifically to look at this one, but they may have gone back, and then over time it may have strayed to where we are. So that is not consistent and timely, correct. And also in relation, for example, for strategic approach to CODs, I can say that they're being assigned in an alphabetical order instead of the certificate of default for the highest fine. And then when legal services would make a recommendation, for example, 215 of them, only 46 of them would be processed. So I can say that throughout the report, Court Services is working on the matter. I can say from my collection industry expertise, it is not methodical, strategic, to the point where it needs to be, or timely. And there's opportunities here. So it's not that everything is wrong, but certainly it's not where it needs to be. And that would be one example you've pulled out.
Okay, just another question. I guess point D on the same page, you mentioned that centralizing delinquent receivables would be a great advantage to the city, which was recommended by the Auditor General in 2012. So going back again, if that recommendation had been implemented, would be here today discussing this.
I will turn that to the treasurer.
Through the chair, our response to the recommendation in 2012 was that we would look at this as part of shared services, and we would look at business intelligence tools to see how we could do things better. This, unfortunately, did not make the cut corporately as part of shared services. Our business intelligence tools have come a long way, and we are currently looking at invoicing and collection across the organization to see what we can do better and whether that should be centralized or not. Invoicing and collection is an integral part of certain operations, and it's not something that we could just say, let's move them all to Metro Hall and have them under accounting services tomorrow. But certainly it is something that we're moving along with. We do dunning charges, we do better reporting, we do report on write-offs annually. We just did that to the last GMC, and certainly we can do a lot better, and I think we're having the tools to get there, and we vow that we will.
Just one more quick question for the Auditor General. Your recommendation number 20 requests the Executive Director of MLS in consultation with a solicitor to evaluate whether or not POA fines can serve as a condition for issuing or renewing a license. I'm not sure if legal has reviewed that yet, but my gut feel tells me that that won't be possible. But if it is possible to do that, the ultimate action that you can take in business licensing is to issue a closure order on a business. And it concerns me a little bit that we would put something like that forward when the owner of a business could be in default, and the ultimate action taken by the city, which I don't think would happen, but could happen if we adopted this, would be to close a business and impact whoever works for that business. I know that's probably not your intent, but if that authority was granted, that could be the outcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from before I go? I will ask one, I believe. The report lays out 32 recommendations, and there's a lot. There's a lot from simply writing a letter to the province all the way to some very, very complex systems and perhaps some procurements that need to be made. The other theme that I heard through the report is that time is of the essence. And you can see that in the numbers and in the tables, that if you're not on a debtor right away, the chances are, as each day passes, the likelihood of retrieving that debt grows. I know in the recommendations there are a number of very long timelines in some cases, some a year and a half, but I would ask, I think the auditor first at least, are there some extremely important critical timelines in there where there's a high yield, even though it takes some work to do whatever the task is in the management response to the recommendations of the auditor? Are there ones in your view that are worth focusing on with additional vigor and effort? Because they will yield back results, whether it's an IT system or working on an MOU. You know, what are those ones in your experience and in your analysis of these cases that really the eye should be on first?
Thank you. Chair, data analytics, reviewing the data, we've had many hits out of that, and I think that that's an area where the information can be processed better. We just took a very high look, and we're going to work and transfer any tools that we can and information that we can to core services and to legal services and the strategies that we've used. And I think they're going to be able to move forward and be able to as they have said, upload more to the tax rolls. I think that's going to be a positive initiative, and that can be done today, and we will continue to walk alongside and can check things, but share information. So that can be done today. The work around the legislative tools is a very important matter. Legal Services has done a lot of work in that area already. They know the law in that area. It's ready to go. I think what it needs is the support of the council and support of the mayor to move that forward. And you're completely in great hands with Rodney Gill on that matter. So that can be done. The work has been done there. It's over the longer term of sharing the problem and getting the expertise to help the city to solve this in a broader way. That's going to take some time. But there are models out there. There are companies who do this to share information. So I think it's worthwhile leveraging the economies of scale, but that's going to take more thought. So there are some immediate things that can happen, but the system is a bit longer, but it needs to start now to move forward in a cohesive manner.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, members of council that wish to speak? Councillor Matlow, Councillor Hart. Councillor Matlow, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that I first of all appreciate the report that was brought forward. I think it's important, first of all, that we're having a discussion about this, that we are highlighting the fact that we are going without over $500 million that rightfully should be collected, as the AG said earlier, not only as a source of revenue, but also to ensure that our ability to govern effectively and ensure that people are playing by the rules is respected. The system breaks down when we don't do that well. And speaking of systems, there is a disagreement that I've heard about whether or not the system is working as consistently and methodically as it should to be able to collect these fines. What I'm hearing from staff is that, and if I inferred incorrectly, I apologize, but what I'm hearing is that they believe that within the tools that they've had, that they are using them, but there probably is a lot, or there certainly is room for improvement as far as even what they're able to do with our partners to ensure that they are successful. Nobody reasonably can accept that that much money should just be floating out there when there are people who break the rules and there's no consequences. I've also heard an announcement by the mayor that there's going to be a blitz this summer. And I still want to understand what that will mean. How are we going to effectively, if we still have limited tools in the toolbox, how can we announce a blitz? That sounds like a reaction, but it doesn't sound, speaking of methodical, it doesn't sound like a sincere way to go about it, or perhaps we're raising expectations too high before we're actually able to deliver. So what I look forward to as the next step is hearing back from our staff as to whether we call it a blitz, which is a good, it's good rhetoric, but honestly, like what is our methodical plan to collect these fines and have a better structure in place to ensure this doesn't happen again? That's really the question. And I look forward to hearing back from them about what that plan is and then how we as council can support them to make sure that they do their jobs well. And I look forward also to hearing back from the AG eventually how that has gone, because ultimately we've got a big problem. And I look forward to finding out what tools we can use in the future to be able to see that through to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment, the AG has got a lot on her plate and her staff have a lot on their plate. And this report was comprehensive. It took me, I read it twice and it took quite a while to get through the report. And, we at this committee, we talk a lot about value for money. And to me, value for money for the Auditor General and her office is really important too. And when I look back on the 2007 report and I look back on the 2012 report, and my feeling is if all of the recommendations in those two reports had been implemented, the Auditor General could have focused her time and her staff's energy on something else other than this report. So I think we've gone down this road 3 times now, and I'm hoping that this report will make some change. But if you look in 2007, much of what was identified today was identified back then, and the default has more than doubled since 2007. So I think you have to keep that in mind, and I thank the Auditor General for all the work, but at the same time, I'm sorry that she had to do this report, quite frankly.
Thank you. And I'll speak briefly as well. Of course, thank you to the Auditor General and her team, and thank you to the management staff that worked with the Auditor General to bring this report forward. A tremendous piece of work, very complex, and I agree with Councillor Hart. It took a couple of reads to fully understand all of the things that were being said in there, but I wanted to take a step back about why it's important. We often talk about money at the Audit Committee and how it drives a lot of things, but I think there's more to this report than that. You know, anything I've learned about debt collection is there's some interesting stuff in this report, but I mean, I'll tell you, there's a Netflix show on it about debt collection. I mean, it's a fascinating thing that goes on. And the takeaway I had from that, and I'm not saying the show informed me of my views of the report, but I think what it showed is a changing world around us. And the auditor mentioned, you know, there's a couple of themes in here. There's working fast, there's working smarter, there's working together. I think the working together is a really important part because we have to watch what other jurisdictions are doing to collect on debtors, be it simple debt collection, if it's utilities chasing people down for bills, or in our case, people that had judgments against them and fines that are owing to the Crown, which is really, you know, the people of Ontario. It's important to go and collect that money. And to learn from the systems out there. I mean, the debtors are sophisticated themselves, and they'll find ways to evade paying these monies. Some of them can't pay it, I get it. But it's about keeping up with all of the changes around the world. And sometimes we're in here keeping our head down, doing the best that we can with the systems that we have. But reaching out to others and bringing that in on board to what we're doing is about change, and it's about modernizing government. And I think this report gives the staff a springboard to do that. And I'll give one last thought. Again, it wasn't all about money. It's about justice, and it's about deterrence with respect to people that break the law. And there's a table in the report. There's the sentencing table, and there's an interesting observation that, look at that, it's dropping off. Now, I mean, we know there's a lot of reasons about that. Maybe there is more or less enforcement going on in the field. Maybe there's more or less enforcement going on in the courts. But it's no wonder that the side discussion with many councillors is, look at all this traffic that's happening out there, and look at these people speeding and breaking the law. Well, I don't know, I see a cause and effect here. People seem to be getting away with it and not getting the sentences. And then on top of that, the ones that are caught are not paying the fine. And it's indicative of the lack of respect to the law, the lack of respect to the communities they're in, the cities that they're in, and their civic obligations. So good on us to go and chase that down. In the report, I think there was somebody with 25 fines racked up, and probably more by now. And for that reason, I think we should make that extra bit of effort to go and chase that money down, because it says something about us as a government. It says something as a resolve, as a society, that we treat this seriously, and people need to pay up for doing something wrong. And I thank everybody that's worked on this, and I look forward to the future reports on it.
Just a point of order.
Certainly. Point of order, sir.
Is it possible for staff or the AG perhaps to provide us a list of the corporations who are debtors to the City of Toronto?
I'll allow that question because I know I'd asked that before, and
Sure,
there might be some further work on that, and maybe we could talk offline between now and council.
May I just even know at this point, is there a possibility that we will receive this before council, like just, and then we'll get into more detail offline?
Does staff have a comment on that, or?
Yeah, so through the chair to the councillor, it might depend if you're asking for that to be public or not. If you're just asking that city council be advised of the list, just preliminary, I don't think there'd be a legal impediment to that, to advising a list of these are the corporate debtors.
On purple paper, you mean?
Yeah.
But
like, I think we'd have to review it further if you're asking for it to be part of a public report.
Okay, so we can discuss that.
I like your thinking, though, councillor.
I like your
Absolutely.
thinking. Good thinking. Okay.
Okay, I also had some technical, I'm sorry, I should, is there anyone else to speak? Okay, thank you. I wanted to place a technical amendment, and I apologize procedurally, I should have put that up front. Out of the outcome of the staff responses, I have received some information from staff that we have to make some fine adjustments to them. They are highly technical in nature, and I hope you will support them. They are fully supportive of the recommendations and make them even stronger. If there's no questions on that, Councillor Hart?
Are these amendments supported by staff?
Yes, they were
Reviewed by staff?
deeply generated through them. If there is no other speakers, I would ask that all those in favor of the recommendation, of the amendments before us, pardon me. Thank you. Those are passed. And on the item itself, all those in favor as amended, and that is passed. Thank you very much. So we are at AU 12.2, Children's Services Division, Opportunities to Achieve Greater Value for Childcare from Public Funds. We do have some speakers, and our first speaker on the list is Laurel Rothman.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'm the interim coordinator for the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare. We're Ontario's central advocacy group for a system of universally accessible, high-quality childcare and have been at it since 1981. First, I'd like to say that in principle, we strongly support the prudent and transparent use of public funds. Indeed, we strongly recommend that public funds for childcare be directed only to public and nonprofit programs to ensure that indeed those funds are used only for the operation of the programs and not susceptible to decisions of shareholders or other unmonitored entities. Notwithstanding, we're advising that the first recommendation of this comprehensive report, the recommendation to examine alternative service delivery options for the city-run centers, is, in our view, unnecessary and seems to contradict current city policy as outlined in the Child Care Growth Strategy Phase 1, the 2015 to 19 Service Plan, which were both overwhelmingly supported by Council, to their credit, in our view. And both of those plans highlighted not only the need to grow significantly early learning and child care services through careful planning, long-term investment to meet Toronto's demand for childcare, but also endorsed the move toward the delivery of childcare as a universal service. So, as you know, the option of alternative service delivery has been extensively reviewed several times in recent years. You'll know the details better than I. Although I have reviewed some of those reports, they identified the unique and extremely valuable contribution that the city-operated child care centers bring to children, families, and communities, while representing just 3% of licensed spaces in the city, 2,921, I understand. Nevertheless, these city-operated centers provide 10% of the spaces for infants, 6% for toddlers, and 10% of the spaces for children with special needs. I think that's a very important example of the specialized role that the city-operated centers play in the sector. The centers are often intentionally located in neighborhoods where other service providers have not and often don't have the resources to locate. They may be located wisely in new housing developments, in city-operated buildings, and they're often in areas of high need with high proportions of low and modest income families who need childcare but require subsidy. Thus, it's not at all surprising that 93% of children in city-operated centers receive a fee subsidy. So, in addition to that, the city-operated centers are in a position to respond to the immediate needs that others cannot, whether it's a high influx of refugees and immigrants, whether it's a major health problem that might overcome the population, but they're also in an important and strategic position to coordinate with other city initiatives like the poverty reduction strategy in particular. Childcare is central to families lifting themselves out of poverty. And to my knowledge, city-operated centers are the only licensed programs that maintain a fully open enrollment policy. We in the community are quite distressed to learn of centers, all kinds of centers, that for whatever reason are either not able to accept or are not accepting children for some reason. We know that families with special needs highly value an open enrollment policy where the city centers work with families to meet the needs as best they can. So I will close with the cost of city-operated services is indeed higher than community-operated nonprofit centers, largely because of better salaries, benefits, and career opportunities that make it possible for registered early childhood educators, who are primarily women with post-secondary education, to both enter and remain in childcare as a profession while providing a much-needed public service. Any move to an alternate delivery system that would lower the professional wage would be vulnerable and would be contrary to proposed provincial policy that's indeed recommending a wage grid for early childhood educators that reflects their education and experience. So we hope you do not go forward with that recommendation.
Thank you for speaking to us. Are there any questions of the speaker from council or members of the committee? Seeing none, I thank you for speaking to us today. May I ask that Sarah Earhart please join us.
Oh, hi there.
Thank you and welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Sarah, and I'm a mother of a 3-year-old child who I travel out of my ward for childcare services at a not-for-profit childcare centre, and I've been on wait lists for childcare in my neighbourhood for years. I've been working with other parents across the city to ask all orders of government to show leadership on childcare. And I should note that I was very pleased to see that the mayor spoke out against this report that you're considering today in the media. And I'm here today to make sure that the voices of parents are reflected as your committee considers this report. I ask you to please keep focused on your childcare growth strategy and to receive this report for information only. Last year, Council supported a childcare growth strategy and budgeted funds to move forward with that strategy. Federal and provincial dollars have finally started flowing to support Council's efforts to address childcare access and affordability in the city. Families in Toronto overwhelmingly support that strategy and increased action on childcare. However, the report before committee today barely mentions the city's childcare growth strategy and its recommendations. In particular, the first recommendation before committee today is in direct conflict with the childcare growth strategy. Parents do not want the city tied up in management disputes around these childcare centers that service extremely high needs populations and not the majority of the city. We want the city and this council to remain focused on the childcare growth strategy that you've approved. Federal and provincial money is finally flowing, and we don't want our city to lose ground and backpedal during this crucial time to leverage these funds for growth investments. We want nonprofit centers and the other 97% of the system to also keep focused on their own growth strategies. In particular, we don't want nonprofit centers to freeze their planned growth because they might be required to take on city-run centers in the next few years. As a parent, I must also weigh in on how disappointed I was with the approach of the report. The report and recommendation before committee today, particularly recommendation 1, make no reference to the costs or consequences of the proposed approach. It seems to me that the report dangled essentially a few carrots in front of families and workers, suggesting that more money would be available for other things in the system. But the city already debated how new funds should be prioritized, and the city struck a balanced approach through council and the childcare growth strategy. We've already discussed this. Yes, childcare isn't affordable in this city, but offloading the city's childcare centers is not going to get us anywhere near in the order of magnitude of savings needed to make a difference in what I'm paying for childcare right now. And workers are not being paid enough across the system, and that is why there is pressure at provincial government to take steps to address this across the system, and not just with those centers that have contracts with the city, which does not represent all the centers. The place for the wage debates is at the province, and that is why parents work with our ECEs at that order of government for that. We don't want the city tied up in that kind of dispute when the city finally has the funds for the growth that we as parents want. Lastly, the report stated that the focus was to explore the effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of childcare services provided. But I did not see anywhere in report the measures of effectiveness via children's well-being in city childcare centers. I saw provincial licensure, health and safety qualifications, but not children outcomes being measured. That is the value for money that we get out of these childcare services. And I feel that that was not measured or reflected, these very real and positive impacts of these services on the families and the unique children that they provide services to. So councillors, I just want to say that I have no ideological bent on private versus non-for-profit versus private in this debate. My child is in a not-for-profit childcare centre. We really would accept any childcare that was offered, provided it was safe, regardless of who is providing the service at this point. But as a parent, I recognize the unique services that are being provided by these city-run centres, and I would ask that you please don't waste precious time across the childcare system as a whole going through with this recommendation one and getting us in this debate. Thank you so much for your time.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Next on the list, I have Martha Friendly. And following Martha will be Amanda Monday. So if Amanda just prepares.
Hi, thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, for having me. I'm a policy researcher. I've been working on childcare policy for about 40 years, and I asked to speak today to challenge the contention that the city can achieve greater value by divesting these 52 centers of this recommendation. I think the main point that I want to make is that the idea that greater value in childcare equals cheaper in a traditional audit sense, based on what we know about quality and funding, is quite questionable. And I further believe that the rationales provided for the recommendation are not grounded on a thorough enough understanding of the complexities of childcare policy and services to stand up to scrutiny. I just want to start by noting, of course, that this isn't new. Schemes to close publicly operated childcare have been around in Ontario for as long as I can remember. In the past 5 or 6 years, there have been repeated divestment proposals across Ontario. Each time, the same rationales, the same rebuttals from the childcare community and from researchers and parents have actually been put forward. In most cases, consulting firms were hired to study the issue. In most cases, public protests opposed the divestments. Some of these successfully, some not. Windsor, Peel, Sarnia, and others closed their centers. Waterloo, Peterborough, Durham, Thunder Bay, and others did not. Back before the 2012 budget, Toronto proposed closing municipal childcare as was on the table as part of the sweeping budget cuts. It was panned during the public protests against the austerity measures and didn't move ahead. After that, a contract to study children's services was awarded to Deloitte, who engaged me as their childcare consultant on this same topic. And I'm mentioning this because the same issues as the present report covers were hashed over at that time. The arguments made to consider divestment weren't convincing enough to be acted upon back in 2013. I just want to single out 3 aspects of the report that I think should give cause for concern. First of all, I'm really surprised at the way quality is argued. It's based on compliance with licensing requirements. Based on this, the report argues that city centers are only marginally better quality than other centers. The problem with this is that compliance with licensing isn't considered by anybody to be a measure of quality. Meeting licensing requirements is considered only to be a minimally acceptable standard below which children might be harmed. There is research by Cleveland, which is mentioned in the report on quality assessments, that did find that city centers were significantly higher quality than other centers. The report dismisses this study, asserting that provincial surveillance has improved since the study was done in 2009. But to the contrary, the 2014 Provincial Auditor General's report included a whole chapter outlining multiple concerns about inadequate provincial surveillance and the effects on children's health and safety. And I just want to emphasize that high quality in childcare is not a small point, but it's key, especially for the vulnerable and lower income children who make up the bulk of the population in these centers. A second area of concern that I have is how the report addresses childcare staff wages. The reason that alternatives are being proposed is because city center costs are higher, with higher staff wages being the main cause, not the only cause, but the main cause. But the report seems to be saying, what, the city wages are too high, or they're not providing sufficient value. It does not mention that municipal childcare wages are the comparator for the proxy method of determining pay equity under the province's Pay Equity Act. It also doesn't mention the clearly established connection between childcare wages and staff recruitment and retention, an issue that plagues the childcare field. City centers and other high-wage centers find it easier to recruit and retain qualified staff. And this is a factor that affects not only quality, it affects vacancies, and it affects the possibility of expansion in the nonprofit sector. So to that point, my third point of concern is the report's assumption that the spaces in the city center, which as we know are disproportionately serving infants, toddlers, special needs children, newcomers, low-income families, can easily be transferred to nonprofit centers. I don't think there was consultation, much or any, about the many issues involved in making this assumption. But I think that whether nonprofit operators are ready, willing, and able to take up the challenge of expansion, given all the other challenge that they're facing, I think that's quite a questionable assumption.
Wrap up, please.
Okay. I think the point I want to make is that there are a lot of issues of concern in this report, and the idea that childcare value for money doesn't necessarily mean cheaper. Therefore, with all this in mind, I join my colleagues in urging the committee members not to pursue, once again, hashing over the alternatives to delivering childcare through these centers. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
May I invite Amanda Monday to the front? Thank you. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a mother of 2 children who are under 4 years old. Toronto EastEnders for Childcare is a group of volunteer parents who've come together to advocate for more high-quality spaces in our neighborhood. Childcare that is affordable for families and better information about our childcare centers. We're calling for immediate childcare relief, and we recommend that the Toronto Auditor General's report be received for information only by the Audit Committee. The Auditor General's report on the Children's Services Division being considered by the Audit Committee today includes recommendations that will distract the city from opening new, affordable childcare spaces that we so desperately need. Parents in Toronto's East End do not want our elected officials to be distracted by wage and privatization debates when we need immediate solutions to address the current lack of affordable and accessible childcare. The recommendations in this report do not represent a viable path to more childcare spaces. Rather, they will result in lengthy administrative and political debates over selling city-owned centers. We strongly support childcare centers and workers who care for our youngest, most underserved, and most vulnerable children. We do not want the city to engage in a debate over salaries, which can only lead to widening the income disparity in Toronto. We request that the Audit Committee receive the Auditor General's recommendations for information only, and the City of Toronto continue to focus on adding more affordable childcare spaces today.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the speaker? None. Thank you for joining us. Next I have is Peter Clutterbuck. Welcome, Peter. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Auditor General, I'm Peter Clutterbuck with the Interim Executive Director of Social Planning Toronto, a nonprofit community-run organization that works to improve the quality of life of Toronto residents. We support the previous presentations with respect to our concerns about recommendation number 1 and would prefer that it be deleted or not adopted. City-run childcare centres are small but essential part of the childcare service delivery mix in Toronto. They provide critically important support to the families, to the city's most vulnerable communities and families. They operate in areas of the city where other childcare providers would face significant barriers to establishing centres. Subsidies are provided to 93% of the children in these spaces, including 120 children with special needs, which is about 10% of the children with special needs receiving childcare support funding in Toronto. When we talk about city-run childcare, we're really talking about vulnerable families and children with complex needs. These centres provide high-quality service and are deeply valued in the community. They will not turn any families away, especially those who have children with complex needs. While this is not the case for all nonprofit childcare centres, primarily because of the resources that they have available to them. City-run childcare centres are also an essential part of the childcare delivery mix because they have the full financial backing of the City of Toronto. For other providers with limited resources, there are financial risks. This is especially problematic when vulnerable families with few to no other options for childcare services are affected. Second major concern is with respect to the loss of good jobs. If there are any cost savings from contracting out these centres, these savings will be realized by eliminating hundreds of good jobs with decent wages and benefits that are largely held by women, and replacing these jobs with considerably lower waged positions and jobs that may or may not have benefits in centres where work may be more precarious. This is deeply misguided. Decent wages and working conditions in city-run centres provide the benchmark for other providers to strive toward. We need the city to safeguard good childcare jobs in the sector, not to eliminate them, and for all orders of government to resource the sector to raise wages to an acceptable standard. Eliminating good jobs in the childcare sector is counter to the city's childcare plan that recognizes the need for a thriving workforce. It also runs counter to the city's poverty reduction strategy that recognizes the importance of quality jobs and livable incomes. The Auditor General's report suggests that through the permanent elimination of these jobs, the city could provide a small one-time increase to childcare workers' wages, and that's not the way to improve wages in the sector. And finally, with respect to recommendations for stricter administrative and monitoring mechanisms pertaining to childcare fee subsidies, the city has accountability systems in place now. If these systems become too onerous for low-income families to navigate, these families will lose their childcare and then be unable to work or attend school, undermining one of the key purposes of providing childcare and moving the city in the opposite direction to which we should be headed. So-called accountability systems can also be more costly to administer than the savings realized. We also note that the city, in its 10-year childcare growth strategy, is planning to move towards a childcare system that is more accessible, closer to a system of universality. Given that direction, it doesn't make sense to spend time and resources and disruption to build a system that is actually more restrictive and creates greater barriers to affordable childcare services. And to conclude, I know that the audit function of the city is very important to get value for money. But we believe that it is also the city's responsibility to give value for money. We support teachers in our public school system with good wages and benefits because they are preparing and guiding our children for productive contributing futures. It is at least as important that our preschool children thrive in safe, caring, stimulating early years environments, and essential that the city continue to play a direct role in the childcare system that provides that value to Toronto's children and families. Thanks very much.
Microphone here. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, appreciate you joining us. Next on the list, I have David Mitchell. Welcome, David. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Mitchell. I'm president of QP Local 79, which represents approximately 20,000 city workers, including frontline staff at Children's Services Division. Toronto's childcare centres show their value of the city through superior quality ratings, service to high needs populations, a higher proportion of care for special needs children, and set the benchmark for quality standards and wages in the sector. Our members in the city-run centres are professional and provide care for children in the most critical stages of their development. I would like to address the two cost savings measures the Auditor General uses to justify the alternative service delivery option that don't fully take into account the complexity of Toronto's childcare system. The first centres on reducing the capital expenditures. Let's remember that the city does not operate childcare centres to make money. The city strives to have 100% of its spots filled with subsidized spaces. The city locates its childcare centres, as we've heard, in high need areas. Half of the new planned capital projects are concentrated in 3 of the city's wards, which include priority communities like Malvern and the Jane Street corridor. According to the city census data, these wards have high numbers of single parents and significantly low household incomes that have a city average than the city average. City-run centres never turn away a child, provide equitable access to serve 10% of special needs children. The city is doing a good job in ensuring that it continues to provide service where it is needed the most. And structures where services are provided to ensure greater access. Similarly, city staff have done a good job at reducing operating costs when services are not needed in the area. For example, the city has closed its facilities when enrollment is low, or there are other operators that are in the area that meet the local needs. Let's also put the city's contribution to Toronto childcare system in perspective. City-run centres account for 3%, as we've heard, of the childcare services in Toronto. It is small but essential part of the sector because of its mandate to target the child care system gaps. The Auditor General's report ignores City Council's already adopted childcare growth strategy, a well-researched plan that includes investment in capital projects to meet those growths and increase access in the most needed areas. It is confusing that the auditor acknowledges the low wages in the sector and the corresponding need to raise the wages, while at the same time recommending that the city take advantage of low-paid workers to subsidize childcare costs, lowering wages regardless of who provides the services, lower wages across the sector and for women. The city and the province both recognize that quality childcare is achieved through well-trained and well-compensated workforce. The city's childcare growth strategy recognizes the importance of building a thriving workforce where investment in salary are also investments in affordability. Increasing affordability should not come at the cost of putting downward pressure on salaries or programs. Having said all this, ladies and gentlemen, I've recently received a phone call from someone from the public, a couple named Lorraine and Kevin, who have a son named Brendan, who is now 15. He falls under the autism spectrum, and Lorraine and Kevin had put Brendan into one of the childcares, city-run childcares, when he was, I think, Lorraine had said about 15 months. Lorraine had said to me in more than many terms that if it wasn't for the staff helping with the recognition of the autism and realizing and seeing this at such an early age, they don't believe that their son at 15 years old right now would be as advanced as he is. He's He goes home on his own. He takes buses. He's active in his school. He has very high grades. He's achieving beyond what his parents and many people thought he would achieve, and they contribute that mainly to the work that was done at the city-run childcare center and the ability of those folks to recognize what was needed at the time and help the parents achieve the goals that they've achieved for their sons. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
The last speaker on the list is Amy O'Neill.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to make this deputation this morning. My name is Amy O'Neill, and I'm a manager of childcare with St. Stephen's Community House. We're a nonprofit, multi-service United Way, now anchor agency, serving downtown Toronto and parts of North York. We've been offering quality childcare in the community since 1974 in high needs and mixed income neighborhoods. So, as we've been hearing, last week the Auditor General released a report recommending to the City of Toronto to stop operating its own childcare centres, recommendation 1, and essentially hand over the 52 centres to the not-for-profit sector. I support the comments and deputations before me that city-run childcare centres are an important benchmark for quality and salaries, and we all recognize that high-quality, affordable childcare supports child development and assists working parents and parents who are studying and helps to fight poverty. However, I'm appealing to you today to concentrate not on worrying about costly studies, but instead on how to grow the childcare system in Toronto. I believe the city needs to focus its attention not on dismantling the current system, but by supporting the majority of us in the childcare sector in continuing to deliver high-quality programs. As a municipal services system manager, Toronto Children's Services can continue to do this by paying the true costs of operating our childcare programs, keeping our centres full with no vacancies, and investing in childcare services across the city to help support all of us with professional pay, decent work, and decent work conditions for all ECEs in the sector. St. Stephen's Community House agrees with the deputants before you to reconsider recommendation 1. There have been many recent changes in city and provincial policy direction and legislation for childcare, of which this is the first time in my career I've ever seen this. But our community programs are exhausted. In the past few years, there has been tremendous growth in the childcare system, and it's hard for us to keep up with the capacity of the tremendous growth. It's an exciting and challenging time that we've ever seen, but we need supports. While we applaud the auditor's efforts to improve the administrative and business practices, we urge you not to get distracted on this debate. Our goal must be to build more spaces. Finally, as a large not-for-profit organization, we have 5 centres downtown. I'm here to let you know that we don't want to run city centres. That's not our goal. We urgently need more centres and more spaces. Community childcare programs can't deliver these programs alone. I ask you to follow your own council-approved Toronto growth strategy to grow the whole system. I trust that I can count on you to represent and protect the interests of all of us. Undertaking a major contracting out study will not improve quality or access to the families in this city. So I thank you to the committee for supporting children, parents, ECEs, and centre operators in making the decision to delete recommendation 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for joining us. At this time, I'll call if there are any further speakers. Seeing none, I'll turn this over to members of council. I apologize. The auditor has a presentation for us. Pardon me. It's on the list.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll make it short because I know as time is getting tight, and I want to thank all of the speakers who have come forth with their views. We've done extensive work in this area. We've surveyed and met with many operators, 519 operators in a survey, and we've surveyed them twice. We've done extensive work. And I'd like to level set the information. This is not about privatization. That's not what my report is about. My report doesn't speak to closing any centers. My report doesn't speak to losing jobs. And my report doesn't speak to situations where, about quality, negative quality. What I can say is this is about better information. This is about making sure the information is before council as you're implementing your growth strategy. I don't decide the policy around the growth strategy, but what my role is to make sure the information is there so the growth strategy, council can use the information to achieve the growth strategy in a cost-effective manner. So with that, I would like first thank my team, Jane Ying, Angela Raflavovich, Bruna Korpeski, and Irene Hugh, and Laura Wright. I would also like to thank the Children's Services team and all the operators, the professional nonprofit operators who have assisted us today, and also the speakers who have spoken today. Keep going. So we all are of the opinion that quality child care has a positive difference in children. And so I just want to make sure I can get my slides working here. There we go. And everybody, I think, in this room does know what Children's Services does, and we thank them for what they do every day in administering the funding, managing the subsidy process. Do you want to move the slides, please? Do you want to move to the next slide? There we go. Just have a slide issue here. So there's 83,000 spaces in the system, but some of those are commercial. And so really, the contracted operators is the orange part. The city-run centers, there's 2,900 licensed spaces, and it operates at about 2,200 on average. The operating capacity is 2,600, but they're operating at 22. Slide issue. There we go. Jenna, do you want to help? So the next slide that I'm going to bring up actually is a distribution. One of the things, there's a few pieces of information that's not been up to date. One is the growth strategy is built on 2011 data, not 2016 data. What we've done is we've taken also every child care center in the city. The red is the city centers. The blue are the areas where we purchase childcare from professional, nonprofit childcare operators. We have 46,000 children in these centers. They take in 90% of the children with special needs. Because 10% is offered in the children's center. This children's center, the city center does have a higher proportionate. We've compared salaries, and we found them to be comparable, and Jane will go into this a little bit later in relation to the people who are served, the children who are served in these centers. And this interactive map does show that in every area of the city, there's many nonprofit operators. Next slide. So we spend $280 million in relation to subsidies, and that serves 28,000 children. And of course, there's 83,000 spaces, but the 52 centers, it costs about $60 million to run those centers. And the subsidies, there's a distribution here, and it shows there's a small amount for infant, but and it expands as you go to the toddlers and to the preschool. So you can. This was in your presentation. Do you want to go ahead to the next section?
Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about the wait list.
So here you have a breakdown of the wait list. The total number of students on the wait list is about 12,000. But when you break it down, there's about 5,000 children who has immediate needs. Immediate need is defined by Children's Service. The practice is about within 2 months they need childcare, and that's about another 5,000. They have future needs. It can be up to a year later that they need childcare. And also important to know is it's about 1,500 or 13% of them, they have already been given subsidies. They are in the process of looking for spaces, childcare spaces. They have 6 weeks to look for these spaces. And then there's a small percentage of children on the wait list. They don't have, the parents didn't say when they want to start the childcare. So it's important to have this breakdown to get a full picture of the percentage and how many children actually who need childcare right now. We're talking about the access to licensed space. So of the, as the Auditor General mentioned, there's about 83,000 licensed childcare space in the city right now. In 2008, City Council gave a direction to the division, Children's Services, not to do any business, extend any new contracts with commercial centers. So there are about 198 commercial centers excluded. The Children's Service cannot do business with them. So to be fair to Children's Service, we excluded those 11,000 spaces from our analysis of the licensed space available for Children's Services to place children with subsidy in this center. So our analysis is based on 72,000 licensed spaces. I just want to clarify that because there's a difference in the number, and it is following city direction and for that. So this graph looks a little bit busy. So what we're trying to break down for you is what happened to that 72,000 licensed childcare space out there in the city right now. So the best way to understand this graph is looking from the top. Look at the first slide A. Sorry, it's a little slide, yellow slice. So these are the spaces, about 7,000 of licensed spaces out there from 144 nonprofit centers in the city to which Children's Services has no contract with them. So they cannot use them for subsidy purpose to place children. So that's why that slice was lifted from the cylinder. And then we're looking at the green, the light green and the dark green. These are the spaces from the centers, about 639 of them, I think, that has contract with Children's Services. So Children's Services can use these spaces, the services from these centers. The top, you see the slice B. I don't know whether you can see it. There's about 8,000 of them. The spaces, these are licensed space, but not in use. So there's a difference. If a center is licensed for 30 spaces, they have licensed space 30, they can choose to operate below 30. They may choose to operate only 25. If for business reason, they don't have enough demand or whatever reason. So their operating space is lower than their licensed space. And that's what this slides will present. So those space we cannot use, right? Children's Service cannot because they're not operating. If there's demand, operator, many of them told us from the survey that they will open up these spaces if there are demand for more demand. The next slide, C, is the spaces that under the current division policy, they put a ceiling on how many spaces they can purchase from these centers. So going back to the example, right? If I'm licensed for 30 spaces, I only operate 25. But Children's Services may say that I will only purchase a maximum of 20 space from you, regardless of whether you have demand. There could be children with subsidies already have the subsidy money, but I will only purchase 20 space from you. So that's what we call the ceiling. Those spaces are not being used for children with subsidies, and it's about 7,000 of them. So the green in that the major part is about 46,000 spaces out of 72,000 licensed spaces out there are being used by children's services to place children with subsidies. So that represents about 64% of the existing space available to children's services. The blue line in the bottom is the 52 city operate centers. They provide about 3,000 childcare spaces. So this is the one side. On that side, you can see that there's a lot of about 23,000 spaces that has the potential to be used, but they are currently not being used for subsidy purpose. On the other side, I just want to quickly, I know this graph is a little bit complicated. We also concerned about vacancy, just like we heard from Children's Services. There are right now a shortage of vacant childcare space out there, and many parents express that. And Children's Services also has, we understand and recognize Council approved Children's Services 2018 capital budget to build, use 49 million to build more, like to add about 1,100 additional childcare spaces over the next 10 years. So for those centers, we have no contracts. We don't know the vacancy information. So that's this one. And for those who we have contracts, based on our survey results, on also data from Children's Service itself, there's about 6% vacancy out there. So 6% is about 3,000 vacant space out there in the center with contracts with the cities. And that's among the city-operated 52 centers, their vacancy rate is 16%. So according to 2016 and 2017 data, the average vacancy rate is 16%, and that represents 400 vacant space out there. So already here you have 3,400 vacant space, and there could be more vacant space out there in the spaces we haven't tapped into, and that's what we are just trying to illustrate.
I have a few comments on this slide in particular. So, you know, to add it up, we have 400 spaces that are vacancy, plus there's another licensed capacity on top of that for the city's centers. In relation to the operators told us about 1,300 spaces, that would be about the amount that they would want to open up if they had subsidy to eat into the capacity that's licensed but they're not using. So if they're licensed and they're not using, that's one piece. The vacancy is on top of that. And some of the challenges are in information. When I'm reading this survey, it was saying we need to know about the subsidy. If we have it, like information around September, it'll help us with our vacancy. So there's opportunity by working together, sharing information to have more spaces. And then on top of that, there are other nonprofit operators that we don't have further information on that may have capacity. So all this to say, on the one hand, we're not saying don't stop with this strategy around building the centers for 1,000 spaces. But if you're going to achieve the growth strategy, you've got to put everything together. 49 million for 1,000 spaces, there might be an opportunity to open up spaces, be more efficient and get down the vacancy rate. Leverage the operators who want to open up more space that's already licensed. We already have a contract. They're already at the quality level. They're already accepting special needs children. So we're saying use what you have better, and that'll help with the growth strategy also.
Thank you. So this pretty well sum up what the Auditor General just told us about. And we just want to stress that we are not recommending the divisions not to continue their capital bill. We're only saying that try to make better use of the existing space. By doing so, you will also help the childcare centers running a more economical, viable operation, because vacancy is bad for everybody's business. If they have less vacancy, they can fill the space, they can offset their operating costs, which may in turn transfer into a more affordable prices for everybody, for all families. So I'm going to go into our income assessment informations. So we review, as part of our audit, we review 50 case files, subsidy files, and we noted in 29 of them, they contained pay stub information. So before that, I need to give you a little bit background. To be eligible for childcare subsidies, applicants must live in Toronto and work or engage in training activities. So during the eligibility review, applicants are required by the provincial legislation to provide their NOA, Notice of Assessments, as a method for assessing their income. And the information on the NOA can range from a few months to up to 2 years old, depending on the time the assessment was done. So as a part of our audit, we look at 50 files, and we noted 29 of them contain pay stub information in that. So these pay stubs were not collected for income assessment purpose. The pay stubs were collected as a way to prove of their employment activities. When we use the current pay stub to assess the subsidy amount, what we found is in 3 cases, these parents would have been paid a higher subsidy amount because the current income is lower than their NOA. So they would have received a higher subsidy fees. And in 12 cases, the parents would have paid given a lower subsidy amount because their income has gone up from the time that their NOA was presented. So in particular, in 2 of the 12 cases, in fact, those parents, their income has gone so high, they would not have been eligible for any subsidy at all if pay stub is used as a method of assessment. So pay stubs reflect more current income information than notice of assessment. Other provincial income-based programs also use pay stubs, such as Ontario Work or the Disability System programs. And I was told to. So if the city is allowed to use pay stub as income assessment method, the city can potentially save a lot of millions of subsidy dollars that can be used to purchase more subsidy spaces for children on the wait list right now. So we're simply asking the province to reconsider and amend that. We're not saying we ask applicants to provide their pay stub every month. We're just saying during the annual assessment, ask them to provide NOA also pay stub. So I'm going to move in the alternative childcare center, which was much debated. In 2013, City Council appointed an independent consultant to conduct a study. And what they found was the operating costs of city-run centers are 30% higher than nonprofit centers and commercial centers. They also say reducing these centers by 25 to 75%, we save 3 to 10 million a year. The consultant report stated that the higher operating cost of city-run centers was likely due to higher staff salary. So here's take a look of the current salary ranges. The provincial 2017 hourly wage maximum is set at $26.68. Cities
staff, the early childhood educators working in the city centers, their hourly pay range from $30.40 to $37.10. So compare this to the same education early childhood professional in the nonprofit centers. Their average hourly rate is about $22.50. There are 644 workers in the city-run childcare centers. There's about 6,000 childcare professionals in the 639 contract center with the cities. Many of them are also women who need well-paid and secure jobs. So as we mentioned in our report, the city-run centers charge a higher fee. And you can see for infants, they are $2,300 for infants compared to nonprofit is about $1,800. For a toddler, it's about $2,000 in the city-run center. The nonprofit is about $1,400. So overall, they charge between 28% to 45% more than the nonprofit centers. The fee charged by the city-run centers are so high that very few parents who pay full fee can afford these spaces. 93% of the children in the city-run centers are subsidized. Despite the high fee, the city-run centers are operating at an annual operating shortfall at $14.7 million every year. So these figures are actually provided to us by Children's Services Management staff in charge of finance and verified by us. We did not just make up these numbers. I want to stress that. So instead of directly operating the 52 childcare centers, the city can redirect the fund and to develop community capacity by transferring. I'm not saying to close any center. We're just saying to transfer the operations to non-profit sectors. So again, we are not suggesting relocating or closing any of these centers. Their operation should be continued, but there could be a different model to operate them. There are significant financial benefits from it, as you can see on this slide. There are $14.7 million annual, stopping the annual shortfall. There will also be another $13.5 million. The saving is because the nonprofit rate, the prices is lower. You can then use the same amount of money to purchase more subsidized spaces, to purchase more subsidized service from the nonprofit's operations at a lower rate. The saving can be reinvested to improve, potentially add another 2,200 subsidies to the current systems without any additional funding increase. Or the City Council can choose to improve wages, to use the money to improve wages across the sector. So we do recognize that the city-run centers, they provide a larger share of spaces for subsidized children with special needs. They are 3% of them, but they provide 10% of the spaces for children with special needs. 90% of the subsidized special needs children are currently in the contracted centers. A number of the operators in our survey indicate to us that they would like to accommodate more children with special needs, but they have been experiencing some difficulties in obtaining funding for children. There's a special fund they can obtain, but they've been having some difficulties obtaining the funding for accommodated children with special needs. In terms of serving low-income families, we did make an analysis. The percentage of low-income family in the city-run center and the nonprofit contracted center are almost the same. 49% in the city-run center, 46% in the nonprofit centers. This table actually was telling you we analyzed the provincial inspection result. We recognize the provincial inspection results is not just measuring compliance. It also measures quality of care because they have ramped up their inspection results. And even that was recognized by the committee because the provincial inspection results, the inspection criteria, many of it are very similar to the city's AQI, their own inspection results. They both measure quality in certain aspects. So when we look at the provincial inspection results, true, the city-run center, if you can look at the, sorry, I cannot use my mouse to show you, but it's the second row. The city-run center that has, among them, there are 47% of them had high or critical instances of non-compliance found by the provincial inspection results. The contracted center, their non-compliance rate is 50.7%. So yes, city-run center has a lower non-compliance rate, but the difference is not statistically significant, meaning that can happen by chance. And we are not denying that city-run center could be running at a better quality. But I think the question is how much, whether that better quality outweighs the many more subsidized space we can provide. So we take a look at the other jurisdiction. Peel Region has already transferred the operation of the 11 childcare centers over to community partners. Peel Region has no wait list right now. Many other Canadian centers do not directly operate childcare centers, such as Vancouver, Calgary, Halifax, and Winnipeg. They don't directly operate childcare centers. Some Ontario jurisdictions operate childcare centers. As you can see in this next graph, these are the Ontario city operate childcare center. I just want to mention, because you see Ottawa there, and they have 11 centers, but they are also competing a review on their directly operated childcare centers. This graph, you have it in your report. It summarizes what we talk about. I just want to draw the attention to the middle box. When we transferred, if the 52 city-run operate center can be made more efficient and offer a lower rate, lower prices, it will also benefit the broader community. Parents who are paying full fee will be able to afford these places. And also, when we reduce vacancy in these, using more the existing space, will also help to make the current existing center run a better operations. And essentially, those will transfer to more affordable prices for every families who need childcare. So I'm going to pass back to the auditor.
So on this slide, we talk about some short-term, medium-term, and long-term initiatives. Management does agree with the recommendations, and just overall, with the 20 recommendations that we've made, essentially, we're not recommending taking money out of the system. What we're saying is, as you move forward with your strategy, you're building 1,000 spaces with $49 million. There's an opportunity also to make sure that you leverage the spaces that are there, the vacancy. There are licensed operators who, with a subsidy, will open up more licensed spaces, as we are informed in our survey. Engaging the additional nonprofit sector. I mean, given that the quality seems to be comparable, we have 46,000 children in these centers. It must have a quality. 15 operators or 13 operators wrote and talk about their quality being comparable. I think it's an opportunity to use up more efficiently what we have and think about, as you're investing money, what bucket should go where, and that only comes with better information. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask if there are questions from the members of council? Councillor Davis?
Just really very quickly, Do you think that the staff in our city directly operated centres are being paid too much? Considering they're governed by pay equity legislation and they're paid the value of the job according to male comparators within the city?
I'm not going to cast a judgment on that. What I am saying is you're already purchasing 46,000 spaces at a certain cost rate.
No, that's not my question. I'm just asking if you think they're paid too much.
I'm not going to take a judgment on that.
Okay.
They're negotiated agreements.
So this concludes, it makes a statement that a previous consultant's report was that it was likely, the higher costs were likely due to higher salary costs. Would you agree that that is the reason why the costs are higher?
Thank you. I have recommended a cost analysis of that because there's efficiency issues around vacancy. There are costs not included, so I believe a full cost analysis will help to determine exactly what the drivers are.
That's not what I'm
But salaries is a part of it.
A part of it? Okay. So, and I'm not trying to be combative. I'm really not. It's very clear. Salaries are the drivers. I mean, there's no question. It's established for years. So I wanted to ask as well, I know that you have concluded that there's a deficit of $14.7 million, and I wanted to ask the Deputy City Manager, do we really have a deficit of $14.7 million? And because that is the dollar amount that's used then to divide up over the number of spaces we have to say that our actual costs should be 30% higher. And then that cost is what is assumed to compare to the outside comparators, which is the fundamental basis of the entire cost-saving scenario that is built in here. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, we don't believe we have a deficit. I think there's a philosophical difference in terms of what should be included in fees. We believe that our fees reflect the actual cost that should be included. What we exclude is minor capital, and that's comparable to the community where they generally apply to us for grants for minor capital, and then certain overhead costs. For example, staff in our directly operated centres are very involved in emergency responses, such as the Syrian refugee crisis. The management team is involved in many other corporate initiatives, so those costs are amortized accordingly.
Okay. The $13.5 million as well is based on comparing on a rate that appears to be generated by coming up with an average. So how have you calculated that average in the nonprofit sector? Have you taken the total number of spaces, how much everyone is being paid, and coming up with the actual costs, or just taking an average?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is not based on wages or salary and at all. We simply use the actual cost operating the prices that from the directly operated center, that what they charge the parents to put their kids in, compare them to what children's services pay to purchase the service from the contracted center, and that's the difference. Because it will cost a parent, like we say, about $2,700, right?
Sorry, on page 22, you say that you have taken the actual prices from the city centres and the average prices in the nonprofit.
That is the average per diem prices.
Okay.
The average per diem that the children's service will pay.
I understand that, but you don't tell me how many are being paid at how many spaces in the nonprofit sector at a higher rate, how many are at a lower rate. You have taken simply an average. That doesn't give me an actual cost that is a real comparator.
We could take that away and give you that information.
But your entire report is based on saying there's another $13.5 million in savings because you've simply taken an average of those costs and said, okay, we're just going to apply that across the total number of spaces.
The majority of almost 99% of the nonprofit contract center, their rate, what they charge is lower than the city-run center, right? So
Yes, because the salaries
that's right. That's exactly
are lower.
That's right.
Thank you.
I have many more, but I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Hart, I think you had indicated a question.
Yes, a couple questions for staff and then a couple for the AG. To staff, is it fair to say that there are a number of recommendations in this report that will help you make the service more efficient?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. On page 69 of the report, the AG notes that 20 of the 52 centers were found to have instances of serious noncompliance during provincial inspections, despite high AQI scores. Can you explain to me how that jives?
Yes, they measure quite different things, and in fact, when you look at the ministry, the way they do the licensing, they do it on a point-based system, and they can confirm that, on average, city-run centres have 2 points on the scale in terms of occurrences, whereas the not-for-profit is at 8. Serious non-compliance sounds kind of dramatic, but it could be as simple as not posting something, and it could escalate to something that is quite serious, but I can assure you most of ours were administrative.
Okay, final question of staff. On page 19 of the AG report, it says, on average, 700 or 24% of the total licensed spaces in city-run centers were not in use. Can you explain to me why that would be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's a variety of reasons that we would have vacancies, so they differ from site to site. They also differ by age group. So, for example, in the first quarter of this year, our kindergarten spaces were at 24% vacancy. Our preschool spaces were at 9% vacancy. I will note that the centralized wait list that the division's working on and that has been recommended by the Auditor General will assist us in filling our vacancies as well. So we welcome that recommendation, and we welcome the development of that system. One of the things we don't currently have the ability to do is indicate which spaces are committed. So, for example, if we have a toddler space available and we know that an infant is moving up in 2 weeks, we're not going to fill that space with the toddler and displace the infant. So there is some natural gapping that is created in the system. And additionally, because we are 93% subsidized, we actually have approximately half of our sites that have no full fee parents attending the site, and probably very few on our waiting list as well. So it's a little more difficult sometimes to fill the vacancies. But we do recognize that we should be moving towards a greater efficiency, and we're hoping that the wait list will assist us in doing that.
Thank you. Just a couple questions of the AG. On page 6 of your report, you note that there are significant long-term financial benefits in transferring the operation of these centers to the non-profit sector. Did you find any evidence that that action will improve outcomes for children or not?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, it comes down to supporting subsidies for children. So it's the balance. So if it turns out that efficiencies can be found, it's not that that money goes somewhere else. It actually would go to the children, and bringing children into the system, as we've talked about, children in the system, it does benefit children. Quality care benefits children. And in addition, the parents for higher wages, being able to find a spot for their child allows them to get their training and get into the workforce, which also supports that. So that's where I was coming from with that statement. Thank you.
Okay. Just one last question. On page 50 of your report, and you mentioned in your presentation as well, you noted an overall 13% net overpayment based on a sample of 29 files. But then in your report, you also say the sample was not randomly selected, and then go on to say there's potential of millions of dollars missed. Can you just turn my mind to, I've never actually seen that in an audit report, that it was not randomly selected. What does that mean, and does that have any impact on your findings of the millions of dollars?
Yeah, thank you. We selected those, and actually it was part of the work that my Assistant Auditor General had done. But essentially, we selected the sample for another reason, and started to realize that there was information on file that showed that higher incomes in certain areas, in certain cases, and lower incomes in other cases, was in the file. And comparing the analysis to other systems like ODSP and Ontario Works, essentially their stubs are used. This is a little bit different. To be very conservative, we didn't want to project that amount, but based on what we've seen and also based on studies in other jurisdictions, it could have an impact of being able, if a parent's income goes up, to be able to redeploy that money. And so we think that it could be significant, but we didn't want to go quantify it any more than that. But from our calculations, based on what we saw, we felt that there's enough there to say it was significant. We could, I mean, you could certainly do a lot more work around it to narrow that number down, and we were in touch with statisticians, and we know what it would take to nail that number down. It's just that for this report, we thought it was just something to speak to the province.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I had a brief one. I believe it's to the auditor. On page 35, under established contracts with more nonprofit centers, there's a paragraph. It says, in our view, streamlining the division's current AQI inspection program, which is further discussed in the report, may also help encourage more nonprofit operators to establish purchase of service agreements with the division. And as I read the report, I understand that there may be some barriers to others establishing services for a variety of reasons. Did you detect in your audit anything related to the AQI?
So we surveyed 519 operators, and we had a very balanced support and also challenges with the AQI system. And it's an area that I think is a success story for the city. There's no doubt about that. Bringing the AQI quality inspection program, we had responses like it's helped us as a nonprofit to everybody to be on par with the same kind of service. So it's helped some people. Where it could become a barrier is if somebody is not quite, is under the bar. If it becomes, I guess, difficult, if it becomes burdensome with more than one system, we had operators say there's more than one system in the province and the city, it can become challenging. So I know that the Children's Services is committed to assisting with harmonizing, and where duplication starts to arise, to make sure that there is no duplication in the system. That's the first thing. The other thing is really important is that they work as case coaches to assist nonprofits to work on quality so that everybody's at the same level. So to answer your question, there's ability to streamline it, I believe, go forward. It is a success story for the city. Other groups are leveraging it, and I think it's a good thing.
And I'll pose the same question to management as well. Do you see that there may be some opportunities in that system, from what I'm reading here, or other opportunities that would encourage more operators to come on board with the city with fee-for-service contracts? And have you got some plans going forward to try to make things change?
First of all, Councillor, if an agency was below the bar and did not want to participate in the AQI, I don't think we would want to enter a service contract with this. These are vulnerable children. There are many reasons that we don't have contracts with agencies, and where appropriate, we do reach out to them. But some of those reasons are the agencies are full with full fee-paying parents. They're in that area of the city where they don't have a lot of fee subsidies. In other cases, it's not a universal system, so we try to amortize our subsidies and our spaces equitably across the city. Right now, because we have not fully implemented the growth strategy, some wards have more than their equitable fair share, so we would not necessarily enter a contract with them. And finally, we're not only looking for spaces, but we're looking for spaces for specific age groups, so it doesn't always mesh. The division, since the implementation of full-day kindergarten, has undertaken outreach initiatives pretty well every year to look at opportunities to expand capacity where we need it in the existing system, and to enter contracts with new providers if they're in an area where we need the service. The reality is where we need the service right now is not where there's a significant number of agencies that do not have a contract with us.
Okay, and I guess my last question, I mean, 3 kids, the youngest one has fairly recently graduated out of the childcare system, so I don't remember all the details, but I remember when seeking childcare, I mean, it came down to price, it came down to location. What do parents use to evaluate or make choices with respect to selecting a childcare provider? Was it the same as in my day? Was you were lucky to get one, or are they looking at AQI or other factors to help make choices? And I wondered if you could offer what the parents' view of the world is today.
So it's a bit of both. We can currently serve 20% of the child population. The growth strategy said we should be serving 50. So it is very difficult for parents to find spaces. Cost is an issue, but the growth strategy has introduced base funding. So we are planning to decrease the cost by 10% over the next 3 years. That portion of our website with the quality ratings has many thousands of hits a month. So parents are relying on it. And that was one of the objectives for making those ratings public.
Thank you. That was it. Members of council here that are wishing to speak. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I hope you'll give me a little flexibility on time. I do want to thank the Auditor General and her staff. Childcare is probably one of the more complex systems, and it is, you've done a thorough review. However, I think you know, because I've spoken with you, that I take exception to the proposals that are set out and in recommendation 1, and that underpin the entire report that flows from it, practically all of it. But I do, or those elements that flow from it. But I do agree that there are some administrative improvements that should be made. I think the AQI could be looked at again, and I know it has caused some dissatisfaction amongst childcare providers, and I understand why. And however, if you look at the general satisfaction results in your report, it shows they're very high amongst the childcare operators. So people are fairly satisfied in the sector, very satisfied with children's services overall. But I think the report before us makes the basic assumption that we should transfer the directly operated childcare centers to the nonprofit sector because it's more economical, is the wording you use. And that means you can get a lower cost, which is driven, we all know, by lower salaries. It is moving us in exactly the opposite direction that we're trying to move in this sector. It is well known that salaries in this sector are low. In fact, the provincial policy is moving in this direction, moving towards a standard pay scale. We are moving towards investing funding in the direct operation of childcare centers to break the relationship between fees and salaries. That is why salaries have been constrained in the not-for-profit sector, because parents cannot afford it. So we must begin to fund childcare differently, to raise salaries while keeping fees low. And that is the direction we're going and other levels of government are going. I don't believe it is right at all to say, let's use the higher salaries of the directly operated workers to redistribute them. That's just basically wrong. Secondly, I don't feel confidence in the costings that were here. I'm sorry. I don't think that deficit that the city manager spoke about is really 14.7 million. The city can only charge to its parents the actual cost of delivering that childcare, and it cannot charge the entire costs of that division. I know the administration is separated, but there are other costs that we take on as a division that can't be charged to parents. And those fees should be lowered, and we should be subsidizing those fees, just like we're going to be subsidizing other fees across the broader public sector. The other thing that I take some umbrage with is the question of value for money. I mean, this is basically a value for money exercise. And it basically says, the basic value for money proposition here is that we're paying a lot using public funds and really not getting our value for it, because there's a marginal difference in quality. And we can get it cheaper elsewhere. And I'm sorry, I think that the reason we have only 3% of the sector being delivered publicly is because they provide the benchmark. 97% is contracted out. Let's remember that. So we keep that 3% because we want to make sure that we understand what makes good quality, that we demonstrate good quality, that we demonstrate good wages, benefits, and working conditions. We know absolutely that quality is related to job satisfaction, job retention, and paying people well makes them satisfied workers who will stay in their jobs, develop good relationships with children, which is their job, and will be better at what they do. So the research is very clear on that. There's no question. So the quality of care question, I know it comes up. Yes, publicly delivered childcare has consistently been found in the research to be higher quality, nonprofit next, and commercial third. That is well established in all of our research, not just in this human service sector, but in others. We're not saying the nonprofit sector has poor quality childcare. No. And someone said if they could pay as much as the municipal workers and could attract and keep workers in that sector, then their quality will rise too. So we need to be paying people well to ensure high quality care, and that is the value, number one value we want for our money. It's value to children, not value to taxpayers as the bottom line. We're providing human services. We have a responsibility to make sure that we're providing the best possible care we can. And this sector, this 3% of the sector that we use as the benchmark for both salaries and quality, has to be there as a comparator. It is also our way to leverage that contract compliance with those people that we have contracts with. Here's how you can do it, and here's how we want you to do it. The AQI has been a success across the country. People are modeling it. I see them at 6/6. I do just want to say finally, the word overpayments is used a lot in the section that's talking about families who got more childcare than maybe they were eligible for. And I was going to ask you, Madam AG, what overpayments meant. I think what overpayments meant here was that some families got more childcare than they were entitled to. And if that's the worst of what's in this report,
thank you.
Then I'm okay with that. And we need to ensure that more children, more families get more good quality childcare in the City of Toronto.
Councillor Hart.
That's what our growth strategy is all
Thank
about.
you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come in under 5 minutes to balance off Councillor Davis. Yeah, I'll give her two of mine, since she's our child care guru. There's no question about that. I have a motion to move, if the clerk could put it up. Initially, I was going to move to delete recommendation 1 altogether, but I have a different motion that I've put up there because we've talked to city staff, and I've talked to city staff online, and there are things in this report that are valuable to the organization that I think they want to follow up on, many things. So I'm moving a little bit of a different motion, but my focus will still be on the original recommendation that was there. You know, I've explored ASD options numerous times over many years, and one of the propositions you always have to look at is value for money. There's no question there's a money argument in this report, but we haven't really heard a value argument because at the end of the day, there's no real evidence that outcomes for children would be better. So without that, I think we have to think very carefully, and I'm going to speak a lot broader than daycare. We have to think very carefully before we go down the ASD road in any of our city services. signaling to city staff that anytime we can find options to pay people less, we'll explore those, and that we may do our work differently if we can find cheaper work to replace your work. I think we have to be really careful about that kind of a message. And I looked at the city website, and we have the City of Toronto Talent Blueprint. And focus area number 1 is employee engagement. I'm actually going to just read from what it says on the website. It says, employee engagement is a strong feeling of connection that connects employees have for their jobs, their organization, managers or co-workers that in turn leads them to strive to do their best work to ensure the organization succeeds. An organization must work to improve engagement, which requires a two-way relationship between the employer and the employee. Research shows increasing employee engagement leads to improved public service and increased citizens' trust and confidence in government. Highly engaged employees not only provide better service to customers, but their general performance was better than others. They had better attendance and were less likely to leave. Making investments in our workforce, such as employee development, career growth opportunities, leadership, and employee recognition programs, have an impact on employee engagement and will have a positive impact on service delivery. So I just want to leave that with all of you, because I'm sure similar reports will come in the future when I'm not here, and I think that's an important message. And I find that engaged employees are much more productive, and I think it's a challenge to engage employees when you give them the notion that they could potentially be replaced by less expensive workers. That's all I have, and I move that motion.
Thank you. I had a question of the mover. I noticed that it's an amend additional. Is that this would be recommendation number 29?
This should read that it replaces recommendation number 1.
Okay. So we'll make that.
Doesn't read that way. If the clerk could change that, I'd appreciate it.
We'll work that through the clerk. Thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor Matlow, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have a motion that I'm moving on behalf of Councillor Davis.
I didn't get to.
Given that she's not a member of the committee, but I'm happy to carry it for her, which will appear before us momentarily, which I wholeheartedly endorse. And I just want to begin by saying I strongly believe that we get what we pay for in almost any context in life. And I want to give you a couple of examples that I experienced as a local councillor in Ward 22. And this is on the other end of the life spectrum with respect to impact on seniors. So you may remember a few years ago when Mayor Ford was in power and Karen Stintz was our TTC chair. Several hours in the evenings and weekends were cut from a number of bus routes throughout our city, including the number 74 on Mount Pleasant. And, the argument was that there was relatively low ridership during those hours, so therefore those hours should be cut from service. So if you're just looking at it from a line item perspective, you could make that argument. But then when you look a little further, you will see that there are no less than 5 retirement residents along that stretch of Mount Pleasant, 2 of which are Toronto Community Housing. And that it is unreasonable and unrealistic to expect that those seniors are going to be walking all the way over to Yonge Street to get onto the subway. So then if you look at what we are providing, we're actually providing really the only way for the vast preponderance of people who live along that section of Mount Pleasant to escape isolation and loneliness, which impacts quality of life, health, and longevity, and help them be part of community, go to church, see friends, gain employment, what have you. Same on that same stretch of Mount Pleasant, there a few years ago, you remember, you may have heard of a guy named Doug Ford. He used to be a councillor. And he suggested that we should be closing down libraries throughout the city. And one of the libraries that there was an argument made for closure was a little library in Mount Pleasant, tiny little library, which has a relatively low circulation of books. So if you just look at that on face value, well, sure, let's just shut down that library. We don't have a Tim Hortons along that stretch, so maybe that could be the location. That being said, though, given the number of seniors who live in that area, that library isn't just a place to circulate books. It's a place where seniors come together and form communities. Sometimes it's the only place to go. It is an incredibly important community center and contributes to their health and their quality of life. Now, a couple years later, I've got a little daughter, named Molly. And my wife and I are desperately trying to find a place for her, for childcare. And it took actually 6 months after my wife went back to work to finally get her a placement. And thank God my mom came to our rescue, as many families have experienced, where she basically just sacrificed like everything to be there for Molly and for us all the time. And Molly loved her ECs. She's in JK now, but she loved her ECs. And it was in this context, it was a private childcare. It was the one that we could get into. Roughly $2,000, a little less, but around $2,000 a month, which is incredible and incredibly difficult to pay for, believe me, even on the good salaries that we receive as counselors. And we found that there was a really high turnover rate. She loved her ECs, but there was an incredibly high turnover rate. There's a woman named Christina who is like such an incredible EC, and remember, they're not babysitters. Like a lot of people think that childcare, ECs are just kind of there to take care of your kids so you can go to work. Yeah, that's true. But they also are involved in programming and educating. And my daughter would come home learning about things that I didn't teach her that. I didn't even know half the things she was talking about. It was incredibly impressive. Her ECs were helping us raise her in a really wonderful way, supplementing things that we didn't understand, including just getting her to eat foods that she won't listen to us to. But Christina, one of her favorite ECs, left to work as a receptionist at a laser eye surgery place because she can make a better living. Can't blame her. So to conclude, you get what you pay for. And yes, we should always be efficient, and we should always look at the bottom line and make sure that every tax dollar is used wisely. But we also want to make sure that we're investing in the best possible service that we can provide to families and residents across our city. Those two should never be separated from our holistic way of thinking and our way of governing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I will just take a moment to briefly thank the Auditor General, the Deputy Auditor, the entire team that worked on this. And I think all of us know the amount of effort that was put into this report. And things like a survey to the industry must have taken an enormous amount of effort. And I think everyone appreciates the work that you've done. I think everyone knows, based on the public debate, there are different viewpoints on the delivery of public services. But I don't want that debate, that singular issue, to distract from the 28 recommendations in here that offer all sorts of ideas for improvement and opportunities to change the system for a better way. And it will. And I'm sure of it because in the management response, it already shows there's action that is actually creating more spaces for kids. And that's the theme that I hear every day around here is, the struggle to find a spot to get my child, to find the right spot, because it needs to be in the right place, somehow related to employment or school, or in some way that is convenient for the parent to get the child there or the multiple children there. And I really commend the Auditor General for this work and that team for finding these things, for looking at the industry. And I also, of course, commend management who have already taken steps to begin to implement this. More so than all of the discussion we had about money today and different concepts, this really changes people's lives. It allows people to enter the workforce. It creates a bright future. It changes things for children who really begin their school life at this age. And I know I've been through it myself and I understand it quite well. So thank you to everyone that has put their effort and their fingerprints on this file, and I look forward to it going forward. Thank you.
Just if you indulge me, literally 20 seconds. May I also just acknowledge again that each one of us focus on various areas of our society as councillors. No one more when it comes to childcare than Councillor Davis, and I just want to acknowledge the work and the advocacy that you provide.
Thank you. With that, I believe Councillor Hart, his amendment is first. I will ask all of those in favor of that amendment. That carries. Councillor Matlow, your amendment is next. All in favor? That carries. The item is amended. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
every year.